Welcome to Animology, a podcast about language, the animal-related words and expressions we use every day, and how they affect and reflect our relationship with animals. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me at ColleenPatrickGoudreau.com and this podcast at animologypodcast.com. Of course, thank you for subscribing to Animology on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, SoundCloud, wherever you listen to podcasts, and thank you for sharing and leaving ratings and reviews. Word of mouth is the best way to share this podcast. Today's episode is Tragedy, a Goat's Lament. Today we use the word tragedy to talk about a disastrous, unhappy, or catastrophic event, one that is sudden, one that typically involves the loss of life or bodily injury, such as the tragedy of a plane crash or the tragedy of war. But hundreds of thousands of people don't have to be killed to call something a tragedy. A parent losing a child or someone losing a limb due to a car accident are also considered tragedies. A tragedy involves a tremendous amount of suffering as the result of an event or occurrence. Interestingly, the word tragedy, according to Merriam-Webster, was one of the most searched for words in the days following the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001. But that hasn't always been the way we've used the word. Prior to the early 1500s, its roots were more literary, as anyone who's ever studied Shakespeare and Greek plays in particular, or literature and theater in general knows, and goats reside in the origin story. The word tragedy is built from two Greek words, tragos, which means male goat, and oide, which means ode or song, or in the early use of the word ode, especially as it relates to ancient literature, a poem intended to be sung. The word tragedy literally means goat song, going all the way back to the 6th and 5th centuries BC, so about 2,500 years ago, referring to the theatrical performances and dramatic plays of the Greeks, tragedies, which were characterized by a protagonist whose flaw or who makes an error, which leads to a series of events that cause his downfall. This tragic flaw, as it were, might be the result of ignorance. It might be an error in judgment. It might be a sin they committed, or it might be a flaw in their character. Oedipus is probably the most famous and infamous tragic Greek hero, and many consider his flaw to have been rashness. And just to clarify, the word tragic, of course, also comes from the same root, tragos. It was developed from tragedy. Now, only a small number of these ancient Greek plays survive today, unfortunately, and you would most likely have read them in school at some point, especially the work of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Aeschylus is considered the father of tragedy. He wrote the trilogy called the Oresteia, which contained the plays Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides. We've got Sophocles, who's thought to have written about 120 plays in his lifetime. Of course, we only have a few left, but luckily we have Oedipus the King, Electra, and Oedipus at Colonus. We also have Euripides, who wrote upwards of 90 plays, including Medea, the Trojan Women, and the Bacchae. There are several theories as to why these plays were called tragedies, goat songs, and of course they're just that, they're theories, but there's little doubt that goats were involved one way or another. One theory is that the performers, the actors, the singers, dressed in the skins of goats to represent satyrs, who were these goat-like woodland deities in Greek mythology. They were the male companions of Dionysus, the god of the grape harvest, the god of winemaking and wine, and the god of theater. Satyrs, as it were also a type of play, almost like a burlesque performance that were performed after each trilogy of tragedies in Athenian festivals honoring Dionysus. The only complete remaining satyr play we have is Cyclops by Euripides. And to be clear, satyr plays are not related to satires. The words satyr, S-A-T-Y-R, and satire, S-A-T-I-R-E, are not related. So in dressing as satyrs at these performance festivals and contests, the actors would have been honoring Dionysus. It's worth saying also that satyrs were depicted as highly sexualized beings. And so today, the word satyr refers to a licentious or lecherous man. And the association between goats and satyrs has also contributed to the characterization of goats as highly sexualized animals, even licentious, which I think is a really good example of anthropomorphism, which is the act of attributing human characteristics to non-humans. Attributing licentiousness or lechery to a goat seems to be a way of projecting characteristics humans want to disown, negative characteristics like lechery, onto an animal. And we do this all the time. As you'll hear if you listen to the Don't Get My Goat episode, goat or old goat are slang terms for a lecherous man. Call someone he's an old goat. It means he's a lecherous man. And the term goat drunk means to be lascivious from drink, referring to medieval folklore, which distinguished successive stages of drunkenness. So you can see the negative association for goats and this heightened or offensive sexuality. So that's one theory about the association with why tragedies were goat songs, actors dressing as satyrs, these goat-like deities, to honor Dionysus. Another theory is that a goat would have been the prize for the best performance in these competitions. However, the theory goes as sometimes the goat would be sacrificed, killed, sacrificed to Dionysus. A goat lament would be sung as the sacrifice was made. Hence, the goat song became intertwined with the Greek plays. So those are two theories as to why tragedies, these plays, were called goat songs. Now, Aristotle defined tragedy in his famous work Poetics as an imitation of an action that is admirable, complete, which means composed of an introduction, a middle part, and an ending, and possesses magnitude, in language made pleasurable, each of its species separated in different parts, performed by actors not through narration, and affecting through pity and fear the purification of such emotions. You've heard of the catharsis in something like a tragedy. Now, of course, as time went on and plays began to develop out from this classical Greek structure, the definition of tragedies changed slightly to refer to a drama or literary work in which the main character is brought to ruin or suffers extreme sorrow, especially as a consequence of a tragic flaw or an inability to cope with unfavorable circumstances. Of course, if you've read a Shakespeare tragedy, you know that's the basic formula. Doesn't always end well. Romeo and Juliet is one of Shakespeare's tragedies, as is Hamlet, King Lear, Macbeth, and Othello. And Shakespeare's contemporary, Christopher Marlowe, is also known for his tragedies such as Tamburlaine and Dr. Faustus. More recent examples would be Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House and Hedda Gabler, and Arthur Miller's The Crucible, and especially Death of a Salesman, whose main character, Willy Loman, is often cited as an example of a contemporary tragic hero. Today, a tragedy is any narrative work that portrays or depicts calamitous events and has an unhappy but meaningful ending. We don't use the term much today, but the word tragedian came to mean a playwright who writes tragedies, and it also refers to an actor who specializes in tragic roles, a tragedian, but we don't use that term very much today. Now, we already talked about the satyr, a goat-like deity. We have another Greek mythological creature called a tragolaph, who is part goat, tragos, so tragolaph, T-R-A-G-E-L-A-P-H, so part goat, tragos, and part stag or deer. The word elephos is Greek for stag. So tragolaph. And interestingly, many types of antelopes in sub-Saharan Africa are of the genus Tragolaphus, such as the nyalas, the kudus, and the bushbucks, who are characterized by spiral horns and white stripes or spots. And in fact, we had the privilege of seeing these beautiful animals, especially the kudus. I fell in love with the kudus and the bushbucks on our recent trip to Botswana, and I had no idea that they would be coming up in the next episode of Animology. As an aside, to just kind of make sure we're getting all of our goat-like mythical creatures from Greek mythology, we also have Pan, of course, P-A-N, the god of woods, fields, and flocks, who has a human torso and head with a goat's legs, horns, and ears. The word's taken directly from Pan in Greek and came into English in the 14th century. So those are three goat-like mythical characters, satyrs, tragolaphs, and Pan, and you can see the goat in their words. We even have another one coming up. We do have some other more common ish words based on the Greek root tragos, meaning goat. You know that little bit of skin that lies just above the earlobe and partially covers the entrance to the ear passage? It's a little harder than the earlobe. You can touch it with your finger. In addition to getting piercings on the lobe, some people get this part of their ear pierced as well, and it's called the tragus. Tragus. And it's another example of a bit of our anatomy that's named after an animal, just like coccyx and muscle. And of course, you can listen to those episodes of Animology if you're interested in which animals I'm referring to in coccyx, the tailbone, and muscle. But how the tragus resembles a goat is a testament to the creativity or keen observation, perhaps, of anatomists, because apparently there's a little tuft of hair on the underside of that part of the ear. It was called a tragus because some anatomist thought it resembled a goat's beard. Now, luckily, I haven't noticed any hair growing out of this part of my body, much less a beard, but apparently someone did back in 1615, which is, to date, the earliest written documentation we have of the word. So if you've had this part of your ear pierced, you've had a tragus piercing. And now I bet you're going to hear that word a dozen times, even though you've never heard of it before now. That's how that works. By now, I assume you'll have heard the episode called Don't Get My Goat, in which I talk about the origin of the Old English words goat, buck, and kid, including the fact that the word butcher comes from the word buck for goat. I've also got another goat-related episode for you on all the words formed from caper, the Latin word for goat, from which we get caper, as in frolic, capricious, caprice, cabriolet, and cab. And from today's episode, you know now that the common Greek word for male goat is tragos. But the Greeks had two terms for the goat, tragos and X. I'm saying X because I'm not sure how it would have been pronounced, AIX, both of which share a Proto-Indo-European root, AIG, meaning goat. That's why both tragos and X mean goat, because of this Proto-Indo-European shared root. And we borrowed that second word for goat, X, AIX, to make even more English words, such as the word aegis, which means sponsorship or protection or influence. You can be under the aegis of an individual, a body, or a government, as in government protocols changed under the aegis of the new administration. It's actually similar to our word auspices, which you know is an animology. It's built from the word for bird, and we discussed that word and related words in the inauguration episode of Animology. So check that out. But aegis means sponsorship, and it comes from the word for goat. In classical mythology, an aegis was the shield associated with both Zeus, who was called such in Greek mythology, Jupiter in Roman mythology, and Athena. And she was called Athena in Greek mythology, but Minerva in Roman mythology. So this aegis, this shield, was associated with both Zeus and Athena. And the reason the shield was called an aegis is because it was most likely made of a goat's skin. As a shield, it was the source of protection against enemies, hence our contemporary meaning of the word, meaning protection. And then finally, two more related words to this AIX word, meaning goat, are Aegipan, which is another mythological half-human, half-goat creature, similar to a satyr, similar to Pan, which is borne out in the word. So AEGI for goat, and Pan, P-A-N, goat pan. So it's like a super pan. It's like a super goat human creature. And then we have Aegeus, who was a king of Athens, and he was the father of Theseus in Greek mythology. Believing his son to be dead, so the story goes, he threw himself into the sea. You know which sea he threw himself into? Well, the sea is said to be named after Aegeus. It's the Aegean Sea. So A-E-G-E-A-N, the Aegean Sea, is said to have been named after Aegeus. And now you will never look at the Aegean Sea again and not think of a goat, which was my plan all along. Because, you know, goats. And so the English words tragedy, tragus, tragolaph, tragolaphus, Aegipan, Aegeus, and Aegean all come from two Greek words for goat. And that's all we have for today. I can't wait to share more with you. Thank you so much for subscribing, for supporting, and sharing animology. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, looking forward to seeing your comments on iTunes and on the show notes for today's episode at animologypodcast.com. Until next time, for the animals, for the goats, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening to Animology, changing the way we talk and think about animals.